Okay, here we are again. Welcome to another week at Retropower. Let's see what's been going on. So, first thing I'm going to mention is the screen mount, just because it's turned up today for the Stratos project. So this has been designed by ourselves and machined by Darren at Alitech, who has done his usual amazing job. So on the Stratos project, we've got rid of all of the old dashboard. If you remember how a Stratos normally looks, if anybody's familiar with them, there's kind of a curved dash, but on the driver's side there's a fairly unpleasant looking binnacle with just a flat panel of metal with the ages set into it. Now we decided early on in the design process with our Stratos to create that sweeping curved dash all the way across, and then have all of the instrumentation on a digital screen which is mounted off the steering column. So that's what this does. That mounts down to the steering column, comes up there, this piece mounts onto there, and then the screen itself mounts to this piece. These will be black anodized before they're fitted on the car, and then the wiring connector sits through that hole. The wiring runs down through this channel and then out through this little cutout on this side, which sits above the column itself, and then the column shroud, which we've 3D printed from a 3D scan, comes up to here, so all of that wiring is then hidden under the shroud. So that's that. Pretty exciting piece to have here. Another thing that turned up this week actually was the axle for the Mustang project. So those who have been following us for a while will remember we're doing a 66 Mustang restoration. It's staying relatively standard, but it has got a fairly mildly tuned 289 V8 in it, which is going to be probably around the 360, 370 horsepower mark. So we wanted to put an axle in it that was a bit more up to the job. And there was a few elements here really. The original one was a 7 3/4, I think it was, crown wheel axle, which actually if you try and restore one of those using all new parts, they're a lot harder to get than the upgraded 9-inch parts. So we did a bit of head scratching, and basically everything in the original one needed rebuilding anyway, and it would be nice to have a limited slip diff, and it'd be a bit marginal with the power. So it all kind of tallied up to upgrading the axle. So we spoke to Steve at Hauser Racing here in the UK, who's kind of the authority on American axles over here. And he kind of confirmed our suspicions that it would be wise to go for a full 9-inch new build axle. So that's what we got. So earlier this week, everything arrived for that. I asked Steve not to build it up so we could do the zinc spray and powder coat process on the casing that we like to do on everything. And if you remember last week when Nat was showing us around, you saw the Chevette rear axle casing being prepared for powder coat, and the front cross member, we were doing the strengthening mods on the front wishbones and cross member. So when that Mustang axle casing arrived, we did all the same masking work, which is, you've got to be really quite meticulous to stop grit getting inside it, because you'd think it'd be easy to get grit out of an axle casing, but it's remarkably difficult to make sure there's not a single piece of grit left in it. So we make up wooden masking pieces that are actually bolted in place over the casing, just to be on the safe side, and make sure, of course, there's no blasting actually gets onto the critical surfaces inside where the bearings bolt up. So that's been done, and that then allowed us to get all the Chevette axle casing, the Mustang axle casing, and all the other Chevette suspension parts out to be zinc sprayed and powder coated, which is where they are at the moment. If you follow me, we'll see what else we've been up to. Probably should have turned the music down a little bit. Adam, you just turn the music down a touch. So that's the differential unit, or as they call them in America, the third member for the new Ford 9-inch axle. It's a strange item. It's the name of the manufacturer. I'm not just calling it a strange item. And it has to be said that probably one of the most amusingly named things in the car world is a 9-inch third member, as that would be correctly called. So that's ready for when the powder coating batch comes back. Moving on to the Stratos, we just talked about the screen for that. Also another screen to talk about on the Stratos is the windscreen, which we've now bonded in place. That's all gone reasonably to plan. A little bit nerve-wracking because you don't want to get a massive visible bead of sealer coming out, because it's actually a bonded screen. You don't want a massive visible bead of that bonding sealer on show after you've bonded it in. So we were a bit on edge getting that in there, trying to decide whether to do a mask strip around the screen to stop any overspread of that sealer or not. Decided to do a little strip of masking around there, but actually as it happened, none of the sealer went over it anyway, so we were reasonably safe on that. And then it was exciting at that point to then also offer up the dash, which Dean's just finished the upholstery of. The theme you can see on there is continued throughout the car, so it's a charcoal Alcantara, a black leather and then orange stitching to tie in with the outside look of the car, and there's a strip down the middle there which then sort of carries on along the centre console part. Don't know if we've mentioned this before, but casting right back to when we were thinking out the layout of the dash on this, we didn't want any visible fasteners on it at all. So what we've done is use the components that actually go into the dash to attach it. So where the head unit, there's like a marine market JL audio head unit that sits in the middle there and mid-range speakers at the side. They actually bolt into a structural part of the chassis. So the speakers themselves and the head unit are actually what are used to bolt that dashboard into place. Thus there's no other visible fasteners on it. So now we've got that in there. Screen really transforms the look of the car. Dean's been patterning up to do the carpets this week. So looking forward to seeing those in place, and I think the interior will take shape pretty quickly because it's been one of those cars where we just seem to have been chipping away at little mechanical jobs almost forever on it. And then sometimes you kind of look back at it and think, right, what have we got left to do? And it seems like quite a small amount of jobs. I'm sure there'll be complications along the way, as there always are. But with the carpets in, the seats have already been upholstered, the dash can now be fully fitted. I think it's going to transform reasonably quickly inside. So that's where we're at on the Stratos. So if we have a wander over here, Manta I think was on the ramp last week. We were just in the process of fitting the Volvo axle on it. We obviously did a full mock-up build on this some time ago. This project was on pause for a while. But we've done a 5-link Volvo axle in it. Standard Manta front subframe, and obviously it's got a Rover V8, which I think Nat showed you last week. So Clive's just been on with making a start on the exhaust manifolds for that. We're using the P38 tubular manifolds, but flipped so they point forwards. And then the manifold on this side will have a loop round to a collector almost in the middle, and then the two pipes go back down into one before they get to the engine mount on this side, and then from that point it'll be a single system all the way back down this side. And it has to do that forward sweep just because there's absolutely zero room rearward of that point. And actually when TVR used these engines in some of their earlier cars, they had to do much the same thing, bring the exhaust around the front. It's just rolling on temporary wheels at the minute, although the Weller steels on the back do look quite cool. At the moment it's on Volvo PCD rear and temporary Manta hubs on the front, but we are having a set of alloy front hubs done with the Volvo PCD, so it will be Volvo stud pattern all round. So that's where we're at on that. Shortly to be back on with the exhaust manifold. Utah, back from its one and only trip away from here before it's a completed car. To have its exhaust manifold made. So it went off to Simpson Race Exhausts. Matt Simpson, pretty much the only guy we entrust to do exhaust fabrication. In my opinion, the best guy in the UK. As usual, done a fantastic job of that. On this occasion, we opted to do the system build ourselves. So he's done it. He's got a 3-to-2-into-1 manifold on there, and he's left it at the one where it exits under the floor at the front here, and then we're going to build the system from there back. The reason for that is it's a relatively straightforward system, and there was still a little bit of decision to be made on the exact full bump and full droop positions of the axle, and I wanted to make sure we'd completely finalised that before we did the over axle bend on it, so we decided to do the system from there back ourselves. The components for that, or some of them, turned up today, so I would guess next week we might actually have this on the ramp and be on with that. The other thing we've been on with since it got back, I'm trying to think when that was. It's Thursday now, it must have come back Tuesday, so we haven't had it back long. We've been on with the door frame fitment. So if you remember, the chrome frames went away to Derby Plating to be re-chromed. They've now come back. We also had all new glass cut for it. If you think back a couple of episodes, we did plywood templates of all the glass from the originals, sent them away to have brand new glass made for all of the flat sections. So door glasses, the rear quarter lights and the front quarter lights. The front and rear windscreens you can buy new off the shelf anyway, so we didn't need to do those. But Really good job of those done. In fact, they're incredibly clear, and I've got a feeling there's already been one incident of somebody trying to put their head through the window, looking in the car, not realising it was there. I think it's going to be covered in face prints, like splattered birds on a patio door. Yeah, it's nice to be getting those in, getting the glass in. I think Trev's just been fitting the window lifter mechanisms, which we'd previously had stripped and plated. So we'll be getting those lifter mechanisms bonded onto the bottom of the glass. And at that point, I think we're on to finishing the central locking actuator installation. And that's pretty much buttons up all of the door builds on it. The second batch of chrome has gone away. I don't know if Nat mentioned that last week, but these strips from down the side here, that I think Nat showed them, Stu doing the brass pointed ends on the back there. So that lot's all gone to Derby plating now to be chromed, along with the front grille, headlight bezels, rear light bezels, and any other remaining exterior chrome trim. But they were all our second batch, so they were all parts that weren't going to hold up any of the rest of the build of the car. So yeah, really looking forward to that. Now I think the carpets are going to be one of the next things on the agenda, patterning up for the carpets. Dean's already done the upholstery of the seats. Centre console, we got the main fascia panel back from waterjet cutting this week. So we've now got to put the chamfers onto that. That's kind of a multi-stage process where we've drawn up all of the components of that console, which we showed you previously. The main fascia panel is going to be the waterjet, the blank of it. Then we've got to machine in the chamfers on all of those apertures. Then we're going to roll the curve onto it, and then it'll be ready to send away to get the wood grain pattern hydro-dipped onto it, along with all of the other wood trim. So that's going to be something we're on with in this week and next week. And speaking of multi-stage processes involving aluminium, the steering wheel for that car, we showed you, we got the blank for that back from waterjet cutting a couple of weeks ago. We'd done the routed plywood rim for it. We also showed, I think, the grooves being machined into it. Well, we're on the final stage for the aluminium part now, which is just polishing that to the sort of polished finish that we want to have on it. We've also got the horn push back. We showed, I think, before, we'd machined that to work with like an original plastic Momo horn push insert. We machined a solid aluminium version, so we could then have laser cut into it the Jaguar logo that we wanted. So that's now back from having that done, and Clive's about to polish that up in a minute as well, which is going to be a stressful one because it's really, really fine detail on it. Thanks to Bruce Holder, who did the laser engraving on that for us. So that's kind of the final components coming together. Once that's polished, we're going to dowel and bond the plywood rim onto that, and then the very last bit will be over to Dean to upholster it in leather. So really can't wait to see that come together after a lot of effort on a number of people's parts. Right, follow me. We'll go through to the metal workshop. I should mention that we've got plenty of hoodies and t-shirts in stock at the minute, and it looks like the weather's going to start improving soon, so now's probably a good time to grab yourself a Retropower t-shirt. Go around this way. Right, so we mosey our way over here. This is where Nat's been doing most of his tinkering this week, and Tom as well. So I think last week we showed you the early stages of the construction of this bulkhead, which has been explained before. It's also the air manifold that feeds air in from the intakes of the front of the car to the new heating and aircon unit, and that's the main reason for repositioning this bulkhead, is so we could actually get a decent modern heating and aircon unit in here without having to have the dashboard miles further back than it would have originally been. So I think last time all the front structure of this was in, and you saw the bulkhead dividing plates in there. Since then, we've now made the rear closing plate for this, given the inside of here a really good coating of corrosion-resistant epoxy primer. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get in there, and we don't really want to wax inject massively in there because you'll end up getting the smell of that wax in through your ventilation system forever and a day. So, really good coating of epoxy primer. And then before this rear face could go on, there was various other details that needed to be tackled. One is the feed of air actually to the aircon unit. So there'll be this fan unit will be somewhere around here, which will then feed the main aircon and heater unit, which sits here. To get the air over to that, Nat's done this very nicely fabricated cone, which will be welded on there, and then there'll just simply be an edge seal, like a boot aperture seal there, which will then just butt up against the fan intake when that's bolted into place. So that's the fresh air feed to the heater system. Then we've also got this little sardine tin assembly in here, which has been put in to create a recess. So this is effectively a single skin. It's actually a double skin because of the top of this tin is spot welded to the outer here, but it's creating a thin layer where we could run the aircon and heater pipes through. And we needed a reasonable sized aperture there so we can actually get into not only do the lock nuts up, but also do the fittings up that go on the inside of here. And that's where the aircon, refrigerant and warm coolant to warm the heater up pass from the engine bay into the cockpit. So there'll be unions that go onto here, and then the hoses will come around to that aircon and heater unit, and then likewise on this side the aircon refrigerant lines will run across here to the aircon compressor, and the hot water lines will come down here to the 2 outlets on the thermostat housing here. One of them will have a valve in place, which is an electronically controlled valve to shut off or open the hot water to the heater unit itself. And there'll also be a small bypass which we have to put in to circulate. If that valve is shut off, it maintains some hot water circulation between those two connections, because you do need to have some hot water connect. You can't just cut off basically the connection between those two unions on the thermostat housing there. So that's that piece, and then the last thing, steering column. We kind of approached that with a blank canvas really. We fancied using something a bit newer than the original Jensen assembly, so that the parts were readily available, and also we quite fancied having reach adjustment on it, and not just via the old means like the sort of Jaguar means where you've got the lock ring on the steering wheel and you can move the steering, because it doesn't move the controls with the steering. We wanted to have a setup where the column stalk controls also moved. So we've got a telescopic column from an XJ40 Jaguar, and we're just, this is the lower part of it only. The top part slides into here. The two sections of inner column are splined together, and then there's a locking lever underneath, so you basically pull the lever and just telescope it out. So we've been making the final kind of cut through the bulkhead here for that column, which just sits through. Next step we're going to be doing is actually making the mounts for that. So there's one mount at the top here, and there'll be another one on the engine bay side, and then we're going to design a basic gasket system. In fact, I think I've seen knocking around, I can't see it now, a little ring that they've made up, which will bolt around that aperture with just a rubber gasket around it to seal the gap from elements coming in to the cockpit. So that's that, and with that lot done, they've then punched this rear section out, plug welded it all through, including plug welding it through onto the baffle pieces inside, which pretty much completes the construction of the bulkhead. I think the remaining bit is just to weld that on. I think I was going to say weld this piece, but it looks like that's plug welded in already. So it's just the gasket retainer on here and welding that in place, and that pretty much completes that bulkhead mod. So it'll be moving on to the next step on this one next week, whatever that may be. I've got a suspicion one of the next things is going to be the Footwell shaping down there, because where we've got the column coming through is a little bit of a different position. The steering column originally was offset slightly to one side, which we weren't keen on. So we've got the column coming through straighter and further this way. So we're having to modify part of the bulkhead area here where the pedal box goes, or just next to where the pedal box goes. So that's probably going to be the next step on that. So that's where we're at with the Jensen. Morris, back on with it. I was going to say everybody's favourite project. I'm sure it's not everybody's favourite project, but it's certainly one that a lot of people have been saying, when are you going to be back on with the Morris? And that time is now. I think Nat mentioned last week we did a bit of a meeting job listing session, got it up on the ramp, went over the underside of it, and just went over the car with a fine-tooth comb listing the next round of metalwork jobs, which largely now is detail work, although some of the jobs are still fairly major, but a lot of it is to do with making provision for fuel plumbing, loom running, battery wiring, battery mounting, brake line running, clutch line running, heater ducting. It's kind of all of those details, and there's a few more major things. We've got to make the provision for the rear lights, we've got to do the design and make the hinges for the boot lid. Bonnet hinges we've done, but we've got to come up with the latching system for the bonnet. The doors, we're going to put a modern latching system and redesign the door handles. So those are some of the more major tasks involved. But where we've started actually, which is what Scott's on with at the minute, was finishing this rear area of the floor here. So there were two kind of open triangles in the chassis design, which we knew we were going to make use of to mount the battery and the remote servo, but we hadn't finalised the exact detail of that metalwork yet. So Scott's been on with creating a fabricated recess to make as much use of that available space as possible, and create sort of more room inside the shell there. Then he's bracketed up the remote servo on that side, made up a really nicely fabricated battery tray this side, and then we're just in the process of working out how to do the covering panels that will go over, because we're going to have a panel each side that basically panel those areas in. They're also going to house the rear speakers, and they'll be up. We've got to make provision also for how they're going to be upholstered. So an hour ago, Scott and I had a bit of a heads together on how we might go about making those, and how we might go about upholstering them, and how all the panels are going to sit together. We've just done a quick mock-up of the quarter panel trim card here, so we could have that in place when we're designing that covering piece to make sure it all butts up nicely against that. So that's what we're on with at the minute, is basically designing those rear covering pieces there. So next week, no doubt Scott will have absolutely knocked that out the park, and he'll be wandering around blowing his own trumpet. Lexus, so the FJ, as I incorrectly am calling it, Land Cruiser, we're just tickling away really on the background of that, because we can't put full steam ahead progress onto it until one of the other metalwork jobs reaches completion, which won't be too long, but at the moment we're just tickling along things in the background. So we obviously picked up the engine last week. I've now had Rich take the transmission off and all of the ancillary parts that we know we're definitely not going to need. Next step is I need a transmission for this. So we know we can get one new from Toyota, but I want to do an initial mock-up with a used one so we don't fork out $5 or $6 grand for a new transmission, only to find it doesn't work as we think it will. So on that note, if anybody in the UK has got a Toyota A440F auto transmission from an old Land Cruiser, so it'd be anything after FJ40 and before 100 series, so like 60, 70, 80 series Land Cruisers, all use the same one. So if anybody's got one of those that they either want to sell us or lend us for our mock-up purposes, that would be really handy. So that's the next step on that. Get that all, get the transmission here, and the bell housing I know I can get new, so I'm going to get one of those, and then we're going to get that mocked up in the car. And James has just been working on the Chevette. Gaz is actually off this week, and then next week there's suddenly going to be a flurry of body shop activity, because we've got a new guy starting next week who we'll introduce in the next episode. But Gaz will have an accomplice in the body shop, and he will be ploughing on with the Chevette. We have been tickling along with jobs on the Chevette while we wait for the ability to start the bodywork on it. Obviously we talked about the axle and the front subframe, etc., going for powder coat, and James has just been templating the doors and the inner quarter panels for the carbon fibre trim panels that we're going to make for those. So we've been tickling along with a lot of little jobs in the background that will enable us to get it all together much more quickly once the bodywork's done. And then, yeah, next episode we'll be flat out with the initial prep and filler work on that shell. So very, very excited to see that sort of progress to paint. In fact, the owner sent me a picture of a black, we're painting it black, that's just ruined the fun, hasn't it? But the owner sent me a picture of a black one with the same kit on today. It's the first time I've seen one in a long while where I thought, wow, that looks absolutely stunning. So it sort of reaffirmed my excitement to see that reach paint. So yeah, we'll catch up with you again next week. That's it for this week. See you next time.
Hang on, I'm a bit busy in a
He's
minute.
filming me secretly. He's trying to be nonchalant, like.
Not that nonchalant. I mean, you know,
Unsquirrel it a bit, look.
my ineptness at life has
it's
been
Wednesday.
It
documented
breaks
many.
up.
These are great, because I watched him do the exact same thing yesterday. That's where it was. Yeah, yesterday morning I came in and he was
How's everybody
battling.
else do this?
It's easy, just tear the middle out.
That's what I'm doing.
You're not. And then what he does is he gets rid of half a roll of blue roll.
Well, I don't understand how to do it.
Greta's going to be raging.
Oh, yeah.
That's actually for you, the result.
This is bullshit.